one of the most integral parts of mutual fund analysis, which is essentially the rating or ranking of mutual funds. How do we select mutual funds, or essentially a selection mechanism for mutual funds? How do we go about evaluating mutual funds and comparing them, right? We have touched upon a little bit of this in debt funds when we were looking at two funds and trying to compare them. But we are now predominantly going to do this analysis with respect to the equity mutual funds that exist. And obviously a large chunk of this analysis also kind of goes through in terms of debt analysis, but the primary focus is going to rely on equity mutual funds. Some of the parameters obviously are exactly same in terms of replication when you're looking at debt funds as well, and we'll understand what those mechanisms are. Let's now solve the problem of rating mutual funds. How do we go about developing a system which basically helps us identifying a mutual fund? In other words, which parameters help us rank mutual funds, and how do we look at those individual parameters is what is our focus now. Right now, if you think about it, there are many parameters that you would presume are important. Obviously, the performance of the fund is important, right? Then you would probably want to look at who the fund manager is. Do you have any idea of the fund manager? Maybe you want to look at how old the fund is, so age of the fund. Maybe you want to look at what kind of size the fund has. How many more people trust the same mutual fund as you do? Maybe you want to look at what kind of, and size would be defined in terms of assets under management for the fund. Maybe you want to look at what kind of risk the fund manager takes. Risk could be in terms of the kind of sectors the fund is in. Risk could be in terms of the kind of portfolio concentration. When we say concentration, that means how many stocks does the portfolio have? So a good diversified portfolio should have about 30, 35, 40 stocks. Does it have more? Does it have less? How much of it is weighted in one or two stocks? So if the top stock, let's say the top stock has 30% weightage, is that good or bad? That's an extreme amount of risk on one call, right? If something goes wrong. Now, there's nothing like good or bad here. You have to kind of look at it in the perspective of who is the end investor who's going to use this as a data. So if you're looking at a risk averse investor, you don't want this kind of concentration in the portfolio, correct? You could look at what kind of expenses the fund has. You could look at a variety of other things as well as you go along, right? Let's try and identify some of the major parameters that a lot of the funds use, right? So typically, you're going to look at age of the fund. Older the fund, longer the track record, longer number of business cycles it has seen and survived. There are a lot of funds that are not able to last more than 2, 3, 4, 5 years. If the fund has actually lasted longer, if the fund has existed for 20, 30, 40 years, that's in a way a supporting factor saying that this fund manager has lasted business cycle, so they must be doing something correct, right? Fund manager. Is the fund manager ultra aggressive? What is the performance of the fund manager? What kind of style of investing does the fund manager have? Is the fund manager someone who's taking a very long-term view? Is the fund manager someone who's taking a short-term view? There are some fund managers, for example, who are very long-term, right? If you go on the website, they will say invest for more than 5 years, right? I would urge you to go and look at a fund house called Parag Parekh Financial Advisory Services, PPFAS mutual fund in India. And if you go on their website, they very clearly suggest that if you want to invest only if your horizon is more than 5 years, right? There are other fund managers who are more medium term in nature. You see that by their portfolio record, how quickly do they move around the portfolio, right? In which case you're looking at something like 1 to 3 years. So there are some funds which have less. So what's the style of investing? What suits your, as an investor, what suits your style of looking at funds? Then size of the fund. Two things. One, the bigger the fund, more people trust the fund, obviously, because it's like